Following is a multimedia presentation that is a supplement to the Sustainable Country Living book. The topic is the water grid, wells. It dovetails with Chapter 14 in the book, Water Grid, Wells. In this presentation, we're going to look at different kinds of wells and how they operate, because when you live in the country, you're probably going to have a well rather than city water. First of all, let's look in the Bible. The most famous well is Jacob's well in the Bible.
As the story goes, Jesus was traveling from Judea to Galilee and decided to pass through Samaria. He arrived at the village of Sychar, where he stopped at Jacob's well to rest. It was around noontime when a Samaritan woman came to draw water. In a surprising move, Jesus asked the woman for a drink, despite the cultural norms that discouraged interactions between Jews and Samaritans. The woman, taken aback, questioned why he, a Jew, would ask her, a Samaritan, for water. Jesus responded with a profound statement, offering her living water and explaining that those who drink from this water will never thirst again. Intrigued, the woman asked for this living water. The conversation took a personal turn when Jesus revealed knowledge about her life, mentioning that she had 5 husbands and was currently living with a man who was not her husband. Astonished by his insight, she recognized him as a prophet. The woman questioned the proper place of worship, to which Jesus replied that true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, regardless of location. He then revealed to her that he was the Messiah. Filled with excitement, the woman left her water jar and hurried back to the village, urging everyone to come and see the man who knew everything about her. Her testimony led many Samaritans to believe in Jesus. The villagers came out to see Jesus and, impressed by his message, invited him to stay. He remained with them for 2 days, during which many more people came to believe, acknowledging him as the Savior of the world. This extraordinary encounter at the well not only transformed the woman's life, but also brought a community closer to faith.
So Jacob's well, the well was developed by Jacob over 1,800 years before Jesus' day. Jesus intentionally diverted his journey to go to Jacob's well. This well was the location of a divine appointment between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. So what
Jacob's well holds a kind of sacred aura around it. And what's really important is that this is the most authentic Bible site associated with Jesus anywhere in the Holy Land. It's about 1.5 hours drive north of Jerusalem, in the area that was called Samaria in Bible times. Here on one of the main streets of the town of Nablus is the 4th century Greek Orthodox church, St. Fratini, that was built over the site of Jacob's well during the Byzantine period. It's truly a beautiful church, surrounded by gardens, and to get to Jacob's well, we go down into the crypt of the church. We are now standing beside the same well where Jesus met the woman of Samaria. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus was traveling from Jerusalem to Galilee when he chose to walk through Samaria, an area that Jews would not normally enter. When he stopped at this well, he asked a woman from Samaria for a drink. She told him the well was deep, and it still is today. The well is over 40 meters deep, and pure spring water is still drawn from it. Now, if you want to drink the pure water from Jacob's well, then it's necessary to visit this place. But if you want to receive living water, then you can have it right now. Jesus is the living water, and he will change your life forever and bring you inner peace and true happiness.
So Jacob's well is the most authentic location of anything from Jesus' time. Jacob and his family hand dug the well, and the well is over 130 feet deep and still produces pure water. What is groundwater?
there's a lot more to water than all that blue stuff you see on the globe. The water we can see on the surface of the Earth is surface water. Surface water is every lake, pond, river, stream, and ocean on Earth. But in the ground below your feet, there's even more water, groundwater. Groundwater is water that's crammed in the tiny gaps between rocks, soils, and sediments under the ground. A full body of groundwater is called an aquifer. There are huge aquifers all across America. The biggest is the High Plains Aquifer, which covers 174,000 square miles right in the middle of the country. Anything that big deserves a closer look. Let's say you could grab a shovel and dig straight down through the soils to an aquifer. The level underground where you first hit groundwater is called the water table. Below the water table, the ground is completely soaked or saturated with water, which is why this area is called the saturated zone. The area above the water table is called the unsaturated zone. So, how does all this water end up in the ground? Well, it's all a part of the good old water cycle. When it rains, some water gets soaked up by plants. Some water runs off the soil and into streams, lakes, or even the ocean. Other water gets stuck on the surface and eventually evaporates back into the air. Meanwhile, some of the lucky water droplets get to travel down through the surface deep underground until they reach the water table and become a part of an aquifer. Once water seeps down deep enough into the ground, it can stay there for a really long time. Groundwater doesn't always stay in the ground. A lot of the water on the surface comes from aquifers. If the surface of the ground dips below the water table, groundwater flows out into the space, creating a body of surface water. If the surface water dries up, groundwater can flow in to fill it back up. And if the water table in this area rises, so does the level of the surface water. Groundwater can also pour down a sloping surface, creating streams. Any place where groundwater flows out into the surface is called a spring. Surface water can also become groundwater. If a body of surface water flows above the water table, water can seep down through the sediment and help fill the aquifer. Of course, there's another way that groundwater can leave the ground: us. Humans depend on groundwater, and there are thousands of wells all over the country that draw water out of aquifers.
What is groundwater? Surface water is streams, rivers, and lakes. Groundwater is underground. Aquifers are large bodies of underground water. The water table is at the top of the aquifer. Water table levels can change. Types of water supply sources.
For many people in the world, they get their water supplied to them through a central supply system that feeds to their pipes in their house or apartment. However, for the rest of the world not hooked up to centralized water, they get their water through private or public wells. Wells are some of the most essential components to developing a sustainable society. They provide a clean and reliable supply of water for drinking, bathing, and irrigation, even in locations where water on the surface is scarce. Wells historically have been dug by hand. They essentially are just holes in the ground whose depth goes below the water table. The water table is the level of groundwater below the surface. Nearly everywhere on Earth has a water table below the surface, but in some places it's a few feet, and in others it's a few hundred or even thousands of feet. The water table isn't just an underground open lake, though. It's dirt and rock like everywhere else, except the groundwater fills the space in between the particles. In days of old, workers would just dig a hole until the hole started filling up with water. As long as the hole depth stayed below the water table depth, the hole would continuously fill with water. Many wells in remote places are still dug by hand, but now most are dug by drilling machines that can create much more uniform and far deeper wells.
So the types of water supply sources are centralized waters, such as municipal water, water wells, hand-dug wells, machine-dug wells, and drilling machine-dug wells. So what is an artesian spring?
Water can be found in an aquifer. Usually the type of aquifer you dig into when hand digging a well is an unconfined aquifer, which is basically the groundwater. But there's also another type of aquifer, which is a confined aquifer, also sometimes called an artesian aquifer, which is groundwater trapped in a porous layer of earth, sand for example. This porous layer is then sandwiched between layers of impermeable rock or clay which the water can't flow through. The water seeps down into the aquifer through patches of the inner layer where this layer reaches the surface. As the water flows down deeper in the ground, it then becomes trapped in this layer, creating these aquifers. Artesian wells are different from regular groundwater wells in the fact that they actually go through this impermeable layer to tap into that confined aquifer below. This water was also quite clean because of the porous layer the water passed through, which acted as a natural water filter. Unlike the wider hand-dug wells, these artesian wells were usually only a few inches wide. This layer in which the water is trapped is under a lot of pressure from the surrounding rock, earth, and water from higher elevations that pushes down on it. So when you drill into this layer, the pressure suddenly finds an outlet, which drives the water up and sometimes even out of the drill hole. Sometimes cracks can form in the overlying impermeable rock layer as well, and water may escape from these cracks as well to rise up to the surface and form natural artesian springs. The water level in one of these artesian wells would rise to the point corresponding to the height of the hydrostatic equilibrium within the aquifer. If the point of hydrostatic equilibrium was higher than the top of the well, this well would overflow, and this type of well is known as a flowing artesian well. In some cases, pipes could also be attached to this well and utilize this pressure to transport water upwards. Depending on the location of the well, the pressure could have been great enough to bring water up to 2 or 3 floors high in a building, without the need of any additional pumps. But if an aquifer became overused, eventually the pressure will drop as the amount of water taken out isn't replenished fast enough.
What is an artesian spring? An unconfined aquifer is often recharged by groundwater. A confined aquifer is recharged from a higher level, such as up a mountain. Artesian wells reach the lower confined aquifer and require a pump. An artesian spring is a well with the top being lower than the higher recharge area and provides water naturally and without a pump. When I was a kid, I lived in Olympia, Washington, and the city of Olympia has an artesian spring well that has been running continuously for many decades.
It's wet over there.
How it works. It's not that bad.
Can somebody film me doing it? Get it. Get it, Neil. Get it. We're at a well. It's pretty. It's already filming.
I see that. I have an iPhone.
The legend is actually if you drink from it, you die in Olympia.
Yep.
All right. Hank's gonna die in Olympia.
That was good.
The Olympia, Washington artesian spring water flows continuously without the need of a pump. The neighboring town of Tumwater is world famous for its water because Olympia Beer Manufacturing Company was located there due to the water. The Schmidt family owned a brewery in Montana, but when they discovered the great water from the artesian springs in Olympia and Tumwater area, they sold the Montana operation and started Olympia Brewery. Their logo was "It's the water of Tumwater that makes Olympia beer." I golfed in the Tumwater Valley Golf Course And I was told that there are 13 artesian springs on that golf course property. Now, what types of water wells are there?
There's the dug wells, and these are typically dug with shovels or simple hand tools. They'll only be possible in places with high water tables and soft ground. Once a digger reaches the water table, the hole is typically lined with stone to stabilize it. These wells typically can't be much deeper than the water table itself, as you can't dig past the water table with a shovel. The hole will just keep filling in. This is the same phenomenon you've likely experienced digging a hole in the sand at the beach. The next type of wells are driven wells. These are wells made from small diameter pipes which are driven into soft ground. These pipes typically have screens at their bottom to filter out sand and particulate matter, and can be effective, quick, and simple ways to make a well. However, they do have some drawbacks. They can really only reach shallow water, and contamination from the surface can easily occur. The last type of wells are drilled wells, which are likely the most common type of wells today, but they're also the most complicated and expensive to make. They are drilled using massive rigs which can go through all types of earth. These wells are typically very deep, upwards of 1,000 feet, and are used to reach very deep water reserves.
The types of water wells include dug wells, which only can access higher water tables and soft ground to be able to hand dig down to the water table. Driven wells also require shallow water depths and therefore have the potential for contamination. Drilled wells are the most common, and they are complicated and therefore expensive, but they can reach down hundreds of feet to get to water. I had a neighbor that lived up on the top of a hill and drilled a well and unearthed from hundreds of feet down seashells. So that's an interesting thing that would make you think there was a worldwide flood. Water well components. What makes up a water well?
Many people across the world supply their own water through private wells. These wells will be drilled near their dwelling and will have a screen at the bottom to filter out grit, a submersible pump placed at the bottom of the well, along with electrical wiring to power the pump. There will typically be a tank above ground that pressurizes the water, giving your house pressurized water to use in sinks, faucets, toilets, and showers. It's really as simple as that. The main components of wells are the well casing, which is a solid tube structure of the well, the well cap, which is a cover of the well placed at the surface to keep animals or debris from falling in and contaminating the well. There's well screens, which are placed at the bottom of the well to keep sediment out and keep the well from filling up with dirt. Then there are pumps. Jet pumps are the most common pumps for private wells mounted above ground, which use suction to draw the water up. However, if a well is deeper than about 25 to 45 feet, a submersible pump will be needed. At these depths, the pressure required to pump water up this height is far too much for most above-ground pumps. Submersible pumps are used for deep wells and are placed at the bottom of the well.
So water well components or parts: the well itself, the hole in the ground, a casing, which is a pipe in the hole to keep the earth from contaminating and caving in, a screen at the bottom, and then an above-ground jet pump if it is not too deep, or for really deep wells, a submersible pump in the bottom of the well. Electric wiring to reach and control the pump, pressure tank to make the pressure at the house consistent, and a well cap to keep contaminants out above ground. There are 3 standard well water levels. The first level is called static. The static level is when the pump is inactive for hours. So let's say you drilled a well that was 100 feet deep and there hasn't been a pump running for several hours, and you measure how far down to the water table, and that would be the static level. The pumping level is the level when the pump's running, and this action is known as drawdown. And lastly, there's the recovery level, and that's when drawdown has stopped but has not returned to the static level. So how to find water before you buy land?
You know, it's no secret that when someone starts to look for land that they want to purchase for themselves or their family, one of the first things they look for when they're looking for land is, does the land have water on it? Lake, pond, streams, rivers, whatever. You know, but one of the things that are overlooked the most are the trees that actually grow on the property, because a tree can give you a very good indication of how much water is on the land. This is a sycamore tree. We are near the top of our mountain, and near the top of our mountain there is a sycamore tree, and there's a couple of others like it in the nearby vicinity. That tells you that there is water on top of this mountain. Now that's very abnormal. A couple of years ago when we were walking this land, a friend of ours was with us, and he knows a lot about trees. And he saw these sycamores and says, whoa, you guys have sycamores at the top of a mountain. That's abnormal. Normally you find sycamores down in the lakes and the streams, the valleys, the creeks. A lot of sycamores grow in those areas, but it's very uncommon to find a sycamore at the top of a mountain. When you find a sycamore at the top of a mountain, there's water there, and that's a good sign. You see the trees or the leaves of a sycamore are very big. They almost look like a maple, so it's very easy to identify them, but they're not maples. It's almost in the shape of a maple leaf, but they're a lot bigger, and it's a sycamore. This is a sycamore leaf, and the sycamore tree produces a lot of big leaves, and you need a lot of water to produce those big leaves. This one probably consumes maybe between 400 and 500. There are bigger sycamores than this, but this is a pretty good size one. So let's just say 400 gallons a day. Could your family, once you purchase a homestead and build a homestead on land that you purchase, do you think your family could get by on 400 gallons a day? I think it probably could. We have water, a high water table on the top of our mountain, and we're very blessed to have that. That's not normal. But a lot of people, I think, when they're walking some land that they're interested in buying, they walk the land and they're disappointed to not see any, streams that go through it, or a pre-drilled well that may have already existed on the homestead, or other water sources. But if you're walking land, one of the first things you need to do when you start to shop for land purchases is to learn how to identify certain trees, because certain trees consume more water than other trees do. See, it seems so basic. It's just something that's so overlooked that you're looking at land with all kinds of things growing on it, and all those things that are growing on that land consume water. Everything needs water for life. So it makes sense to learn to identify sycamore trees and other trees that consume a large amount of water, because that can be beneficial to you. So when you start to look for land, learn how to look for a sycamore tree. If you find a sycamore tree on your land, that's a great place to identify, and then consider building a house around that area so you can drill a well, because you want your house that you build on your homestead, if you're starting with raw land especially, to drill a well near where you're going to live, because you want that water source nearby where the house is.
Finding water before you buy land can be done by looking on the property and seeing if there's surface water, such as a creek. You can also look at the vegetation. In the case of the video, it explained that you could find water if you could find a sycamore tree. Interestingly, this is the tree in the Bible that Zacchaeus climbed. You can also, I can say from my own experience, you can look for swamp grass. Swamp grass is grass that's about a foot tall, and it's kind of heavy. And this is indicative of a swampy area. And then, of course, you could look and see whether there's records of there already being a pre-drilled well on the property that's not in use. Dowsing for water. Dowsing for water can be a controversial topic because some superstitious people call it witching. And dowsing, actually, in my opinion, is nothing more than a physical phenomena that has to do with the amount of electrical flow in your body, and it varies from person to person. I'm able to dowse, my brother's able to dowse, I have friends that can dowse, my wife can't. And so it depends on the electrical makeup in your body, and this video will explain how it's done.
And the aquifers can be in the form of great big underground lakes, or more frequently underground streams, and that's where we as dowsers come in, because you need to be able to locate precisely to get onto the underground streams. And if you get in between one of those streams, you get nothing. If you get onto one of those streams, you find the water you need. I'll first do a check before I go on site to look at the geology to find the likely depths. So it's of enormous benefit for us to be able to dowse. Find a culvert or a bridge over an actively flowing stream. Buy yourself some rods like these, and you hold them like you would sort of pistols, or dueling pistols like this. So what I'd like you to do is to bring them gently together so they crosses. No, let them rotate rather than bringing your hands together. That's right, perfect. And keep them coming, right in close. Perfect. Now I want you to reset, so I want you to drop them down, let your arms flop down, and then just touch your knuckles together like that, and then come back up. When you walk over the side of the stream, they'll cross like that, and when you walk over and over and over the stream, and then at the other end they'll come undone like that. At first there will be a slow reaction, there'll be a delay, so that you might be, say, a quarter over the stream before they close, and there would be a distance after you've come from the stream before they would open again. Okay, now we heard the typical reaction. That was perfect, that was really fantastic. There is a strong sort of, oh, I'm just going to hang on to this and I'm not going to let them move, and you've got to overcome that. Do you want to go for the middle of the stream, or do you want to go for the edge of the stream to get a signal?
For the edge of the stream.
Okay, well what you should get then is, as you come up to the edge of the stream, they should come together, and then keep walking, and then when you get to the other edge they should open again. It's about this clear head, and it's about at the same time allowing it to happen. Much better. Right, now be ready for it. Undo. So carry on walking, go to the other side. Yeah. Now what you should begin to feel is you can feel a response, and then the rods move afterwards. Yeah. Did you feel that inside you? Yeah. All right, that's great. So the real dowsing response is what you feel. The rods are just really amplifying that.
I see. It's a visualization.
I've studied water and hydrology and geology and all that for many years, and so I use that knowledge. I will check the geology and the hydrogeology. Sometimes the customers have specialist reports written for them, and I read those very, very carefully. And but the thing about hydrology and geology is that they're very good at getting the big picture, so they could tell you pretty accurately what the chances of finding water in, say, this field was. If you look at the way water flows on a beach after the tide's gone out, it doesn't flow off as one sheet. Because the water gouges out little streams, every so often, every few meters, you'll get a stream in a repetitive pattern. And the same thing happens underground, where you've got, say, a solid layer of clay, which is impervious, and say sand above or gravel above. The hydrology and geology is very accurate these days, but nevertheless it's a bit like spot the ball competition, because the streams occur, say, only say 1% of the time, and otherwise it's just guesswork, and only the guesswork costs you £10,000 a time.
So dowsing for water can be used for locating underground streams. You take a couple of welding rods or metal coat hangers and bend them into an L shape and hold them gently pointed forward, and as you walk, they will cross when you get over water. It can be a delayed reaction, so when they start crossing, you may have already started in where the water is. Keep that in mind. Not everyone has the body chemistry or electrical charge to be able to douse for water. But the best way to know if you can do it is to find a water line that you know is in the ground, or a stream that goes through a culvert, and then do a test and see if when you walk over that, if the dowsing rods bend for you. Now, another way to access water in shallow water table areas is a sand point well. Creating a sand point well.
If someone told you could get access to all the free water you wanted, you might think that they were lying, but in this video I'm going to show you how to make that a reality by installing your own well. I put this well in a single day using only a sledgehammer and some basic tools. I'm going to take you through the project so that you can understand what I did and see if it might be something you want to consider for yourself. This is a well point. The blue piece you see there is made of cast iron, and it's attached to a galvanized pipe that also has a stainless steel mesh. Now those holes in that fine screen are going to go into the ground and allow water to get inside the pipe, and then you'll attach other pipes to the end of it, and you can draw water from deep in the ground up to the surface so you can use it. This is called a sand point well. Now think of it kind of like a straw that goes way into the ground and allows you to pull water up. This is the easiest type of well that you could install yourself. Each of those pipes has a threaded end, and the pipe diameter is 1.25 inches. You can get larger diameters, but this is going to be the best bet if you're going to try to drive the pipe into the ground yourself. And to connect these pipes together, you're going to need a coupling, but don't just buy a regular one. This is a special well coupling. It has threads on both ends, but it's unique because the threads don't go all the way to the end. Now you're going to see that I'm going to hammer this pipe in the ground, and normally if you hammered a coupling, you damage the end. But that gap is going to allow you to hammer the end of the pipe as hard as you want, and you're not going to damage anything. I decided to install my well just a few feet from my shed, and this is going to give me a couple of advantages. If I ever want to try to hook up an electric pump, I can put that inside the shed, so this is going to work out great. And this is also a lower portion of my yard, and that means I should be even closer to reaching my water table. I'm starting off the hole with a post hole digger. This is going to get me down about 4 feet, and it's going to make sure that I can get rid of any roots or rocks that might be in the upper soil. And the post hole digger is going to make getting through this rough soil a lot easier. How do you know if you've even got water underneath the ground that you can tap into? Well, the real answer is you don't. Putting in any well has a certain level of chance, but in most of New England there's a surprisingly high water table. But that's also the case in many other parts of the US. The first step is easy. I put the point right into the hole, and you can see that I've got about 1 foot of pipe out of the ground. Start by applying some pipe dope to the threaded pipe, and you're going to want to use one that's rated safe for drinking water. The great thing about sandpoint wells is they're often exempt from any kind of rules that a town or state may have. With your pipe dope on, now you can screw in that coupler and screw it on as tight as you can by hand, then grab another section of pipe, put some dope on the end of the threads, and thread it into the coupler. Now grab the 2 biggest pipe wrenches you can get your hands on, and you're going to tighten that coupler to the lower section of the pipe, and then also tighten the upper pipe into the coupler. You cannot make these too tight. This stuff is meant to be beat on, and here's the secret ingredient that's going to allow you to drive that pipe into the ground without damage. This cap is called a smash cap or a hammer cap, and it threads directly onto the top of the pipe. And this is designed to take the hit of a sledgehammer to drive it into the ground. You can hit that cap directly, but I decided for some extra insurance I added this 10-inch section of pipe below the cap, so there was no way I would cause any damage to the threads below. With the cap on, you just start to hammer the pipe. You can hit this thing as hard as you want. Now the way I'm doing it standing on a chair was not very smart, but this was what I happened to have around. I kept at it, smashing that cap and driving the pipe into the ground. Once you're 1 foot or 2 from the ground, you want to add some more pipe dope, put it under the coupling, and tighten everything up. As you're hammering that cap, you're going to loosen the sections of pipe up. So it's important to stop every so often, put your pipe wrenches on the pipes and the coupling, and make sure that they remain tight. And make sure you also check the cap too, because if those threads loosen up, every time you're whacking it with that sledgehammer, you're going to lose some of that force, and overall that's going to slow you down. There are other tools you could use to drive the pipe into the ground. Some people will use a fence post driver, sometimes called a pipe slammer, but those are really difficult to find. In fact, many people will just make their own. So when I first bought this smash cap, I thought I would just try it out to see what it was like, but it's not nearly as difficult as you would think, so I pretty much gave up looking for one of those tools because this hammer was working just fine. Each one of those pipes, including the point, is 4 feet long, and I ended up using 5 of them in total. And you can see that cheater pipe ended up working out really well because it took the beating and bent a little bit, but the rest of the pipes held up just fine. It's a good idea to start checking for water once you're about 12 feet in the ground, and once you hit it, you'll want to add at least 1 more section of pipe, and that'll put that well point far enough under the water table to make sure that your new well isn't going to run out of water. And hearing this sound is like music to your ears, especially after all that work. What do you do if you hit something big like a rock and the pipe won't go in the ground any further? Well, unfortunately, that is a bit of the chance you take with a well because nothing is guaranteed. It's kind of like mining for gold, except the chances of hitting water are a lot better. And if you do hit a rock, you can try to wiggle that pipe back and forth and pull out any sections that you can and try the well somewhere else. But now we're into the best part of the project, and what you're looking at here is called a pitcher pump. These things have been around for ages because they work. They're simple and they're able to pump up water from as deep as 20 feet. And these are a great way to get started, but you can also use an electric pump on a Sandpoint well, and you can even combine multiple Sandpoint wells together for greater output. Before using one of these pumps for the first time, it's a good idea to soak it in a 5-gallon bucket of water for about an hour. The gaskets inside the pump are made of leather, and they can get pretty dried out while they're sitting in the box. Now we're ready to attach the pump to the pipe, and to do that, I'm just going to use Teflon tape to make this a little bit easier. With the pump securely screwed in the pipe, Kira wanted to be the first person to try pumping water out. Another tip is to pour water in the top of the pump. That's also going to help prime it up. And remember, you are pulling water from up to 20 feet down, so it does take a little while before you're going to see anything come out. And now after all your hard work, this is what you're going to get. Now you might be a little disappointed that that water looks so dirty, but you just need to keep pumping it. And depending where you live and what type of soil you have will determine how long it's going to take before that water runs clear.
So creating a Sandpoint well, this has a well point, a stainless steel mesh to allow the water to come in, extra lengths of pipe as you drive it in the ground. It's the easiest type of well you can install yourself. So no matter what method you get water, whether it's a well, whether it's a spring, whether it's a shallow well or a deep well, you need to check the water quality before you know for sure if the water is safe to drink.
Ever wondered if your tap water is as pure as it seems? Well, today I'm going to rank the 5 most popular methods for testing your water at home from worst to best, so you can get the data you need to make informed decisions about your water treatment needs. So let's start off at the bottom of the list with straightforward observation. This is the simplest and most basic method, but it can only detect major problems. Cloudy or discolored water, unusual taste, or unpleasant smell can all indicate contamination. But the most nefarious contaminants are undetectable by our 5 senses, and so that's why this method comes in dead last. Coming in at number 4, we have DIY testing, which offers a basic, inexpensive way to assess water quality. Methods like the soap test for hardness or the boiling test for dissolved solids can provide a rough idea of these parameters. However, these methods lack accuracy and comprehensiveness, making them unsuitable for definitive results. Next up, we have digital instruments. These handheld testers measure things like pH, temperature, TDS, and even chlorine levels. They're portable, easy to use, and give instant results, but they have limitations. They can be expensive, require calibration, and only test for 1 or 2 parameters. They're convenient, but not always reliable nor comprehensive. And the advanced instruments with complex testing capabilities are cost prohibitive for most users. At number 2, we have testing strips. These affordable kits offer a quick and easy way to check for specific contaminants like lead, nitrates, hardness, and chlorine. Simply dip a strip in your water, compare it to the color on the chart, and you have your results. While convenient and user-friendly, these strips lack precision and don't test for all potential contaminants. Finally, lab testing is the most effective method for assessing water quality at home. This involves sending a sample to a professional laboratory for analysis. Labs can test for a wide range of contaminants, including things like bacteria, heavy metals, fluoride, and even emerging contaminants like PFAs. The testing report provides detailed results about specific concentrations of the contaminants detected and other water quality parameters.
So there are several ways to test water quality. This is the list from the video. I've reversed the order with the preferred one, the most safe one at the top. Number 1 is sending it to a lab. It's worth the cost, in my opinion, because it gives you an exhaustive, comprehensive diagnosis. The second in line is testing strip kits. These are quite convenient. They have specific contaminants they're looking for. It's not as exhaustive as the first option, but it does lack some precision. Number 3 is digital instruments. They're not always reliable and not comprehensive. Do-it-yourself testing. You can take a sample of water in a jar and do the soap test or the boiling test, and that will give you some rough indication. And then the last on the list is straightforward observation. Does the water have a color? Does it taste good? Does it have particles floating around? So again, the safest one is the first one, the lab test. Water treatment methods. Once you have the lab test and it identifies some things like iron in the water, for instance, then there are different methods depending on what kind of treatment is needed for a specific type of contaminant.
There are 3 types of iron you are most likely to find in your well. The first is called ferric iron, which means that it has already been oxidized to form solid visible particles. If your water is visibly brown or orange coming out of the tap, it's highly likely that ferric iron is present. It's essentially tiny flakes of rust floating in your water, which is why it causes the water to visibly change color. Next up is ferrous iron, which is sometimes also called clear water iron. Now, as you've probably guessed, this type of iron is dissolved, so it's not visible, and the water coming from your tap may look crystal clear. If you're seeing brown or orange stains on your laundry, sinks, toilets, and bathtubs, but the water coming from your tap is clear, you likely have ferrous iron in your water. What's happening here is that once the water comes out of the pipe and is exposed to oxygen in the air, it starts to oxidize to its ferric form and leaves those telltale brown or orange stains on the surfaces that it touches. Finally, let's talk about iron bacteria, an issue that is luckily less common but brings its own set of unique problems. Iron bacteria are microorganisms that feed on the iron in your water. They use the energy from converting ferrous to ferric iron to survive, creating a thick, jelly-like sludge as they grow. This biofilm sludge can coat the inside of pipes and well pumping equipment, create an iridescent sheen on surfaces that it touches, and even cause the water to take on an unpleasant taste and smell. If you see a slimy, reddish brown or yellow buildup inside your water tank, toilet tank, or plumbing, it's a clear sign that iron bacteria might be present. And unfortunately, iron bacteria is the toughest form of iron to both remove and control. So the first step of treatment is to always determine the exact type and concentrations of contaminants present in the water. We also always recommend testing your water using a certified lab to determine the exact concentration of the iron present. It's time to tackle the real question: how do you actually get rid of it? It's important to remember that not all iron treatment products are designed to address every type of iron. And the best solution for your specific water problem depends on the type or types of iron that you're dealing with. So let's start with ferric iron, because it's the most straightforward and it can be effectively addressed with a sediment filter. These filters work like a sieve, trapping iron particles and other sediment at the water point of entry to the home. The size of particles removed from the water is determined by the filter's micron rating, with smaller ratings removing smaller particles. Sediment filters are simple, inexpensive, and perfect for handling low to moderate levels of ferric iron. Just remember that they only capture solid particles, so they won't address dissolved ferrous iron. And to keep them effective, you'll need to regularly replace the cartridges. For higher levels of ferric iron, or a combination of ferric and ferrous iron, an oxidation filtration system is a reliable solution. These systems oxidize the iron and then use a specialized media like berm or manganese green sand to trap it in the filter bed. But it's also a great solution for filtering higher concentrations of already oxidized ferric iron. Next up, ferrous iron is a bit trickier to remove because it's dissolved in the water. And so like I just said, that means you have to oxidize it first, which is the process of converting it from its ferrous to ferric form, which can be more easily removed. An ion exchange water softener is a popular choice for tackling both water hardness and low levels of ferrous iron, both extremely common in well water. While water softeners are primarily intended to address minerals like calcium and magnesium, they can also handle up to about 5 milligrams per liter of iron. The resin beads in the softener exchange sodium ions for iron ions, effectively addressing ferrous iron in the water. And while water softeners are a convenient solution, especially if you're dealing with a hard water problem as well, it's important to note that they do have their limitations. They're most effective for water with lower levels of iron and water with a low pH. Once pH reaches neutral or higher, iron fouling of the softener resin becomes a concern. And it's also good to note that if you want to treat iron with a softener, you'll need to increase the unit's hardness setting by about 3 grains per gallon for each 1 milligram per liter of iron. This adjustment helps to compensate for the added iron load, which in turn means you'll have to add salt to the brine tank more frequently. An air injection oxidation, or AIO system, is another popular choice for removing ferrous iron. This system injects air into the water, converting dissolved ferrous iron into its solid ferric form. The oxidized iron is then filtered out using using a media like manganese green sand. Some AIO systems can handle up to 15 milligrams per liter of iron, but again, efficacy is dependent on pH. This time, the system oxidizes iron better with a pH of 7.2 or higher. Plus, it's chemical free, which makes it a great option if you're looking for a more natural solution that won't affect water quality. If your water has over 15 milligrams per liter of ferrous iron or a lower pH, or if you're also dealing with a bacterial iron problem, then a chemical oxidation system is one of the most effective options available. Similar to an air injection system, this process also oxidizes iron, but instead of air, it uses chemicals, most commonly chlorine, to convert ferrous iron into its filterable form. And while chemical oxidation is highly effective, it's important to consider its potential drawbacks. Adding chemicals to your water can affect its taste and odor and create additional disinfection byproducts and interfere with or require additional water treatment equipment downstream. Additionally, chemical oxidation systems require a bit more monitoring and maintenance, including filling the chemical feed tank regularly.
So we have 3 different kinds of iron that can be in water. One is ferric, that's where the water is brown or orange in color. One is ferrous, where it's called clear water iron because the water is clear but leaves stains, and that's because the ferric has already been oxidized and the ferrous has not until it hits the air. So it's a delayed reaction. And then there's iron bacteria. There's an orange buildup in tanks and pipes. It's recommended to use a certified lab to test for this. We talked about that in the previous slide of having a lab test. And that will identify what treatments are needed based on the lab results. Now we're going to talk about reverse osmosis water treatment. When we were in Arizona, the city water of Mesa, Arizona was horrible. It had enough contaminants in the water that I had purchased a splitter for my garden hose on the outside of the house. And about a year or 2 later, it completely fell apart. It corroded that splitter until it just literally had holes in it. So what people would do is they wouldn't drink the water. So they would go to a water store and they would fill up gallon jugs with water that had been treated. Then we eventually purchased a reverse osmosis water system that went under the kitchen counter. This video will show what they look like and how they work.
Reverse osmosis was created during the Second World War to put drinking water on submarines. Here you've got a submarine with very little storage capacity inside, and it's in this huge body of water that no one can drink. So what reverse osmosis does, it reduces the mineral content of water by over 90%. So it took all that seawater and made it into drinking water for the sailors on those submarines. A reverse osmosis drinking water system is a great source of super pure reverse osmosis water for your family and gets you away from all those single serving water bottles. Alright, so a reverse osmosis system like this one here is connected to the plumbing in your home. It's the cold water runs into the system. So you can install this either underneath the kitchen sink, or if underneath the kitchen you have a basement or a crawl space that's unfinished, you can also install it down there and then just run a tube up to the faucet at the kitchen sink. Alright, so the first stage, the water flows in through this side, and the first stage is a sediment filter. So it's just one of these polypropylene sediment filters, 5 microns. And then from there, it flows through 2 carbon filters. They look something like this, and the carbon filters remove chemicals from the water. So if you're on a municipal water source, of course the chemical that we're talking about here is chlorine or chloramines. If you're on a well water source, you'd be removing other chemicals like herbicides, pesticides, that kind of thing. And then from there, it's gone through these 3 filters. Now it heads up to the membrane. So this is what the membrane looks like. There's different brands on the market. This one here comes from Water-Right. But if you look at the end of it, you'll see that it looks like a scroll. And so that's where the water comes in through this side, goes through that scroll, and then from there divides up into 2 flows. So the good water, the low mineral content water, the stuff that you're going to be drinking, goes to one line, and the high mineral content water, the water that's being used to flush and to keep this membrane clean, goes to the drain line. So remember I was talking about the tank and why it only has 1 hose? So again, when it's when the tank isn't 100% full, water is flowing to the system and it's filling up the tank. But when you call for water from the faucet or from the fridge or ice maker, then water comes from the tank and goes through there. So that's why this T is all the magic that makes this one hose work at the reverse osmosis tank.
So reverse osmosis, RO, systems were invented for creating drinking water in submarines during World War II. It reduces minerals by 90%. It has a sediment filter that takes out particles, it has carbon filters that take out chemicals, and the membrane separates the minerals from the good water. If you were off-grid and you had limited electricity and maybe limited water, reverse osmosis would not be a good choice because of two things. It takes electricity quite a bit, and the other thing is that it wastes 90% of the water in the process of getting rid of the minerals. So if you had 10 gallons of water, you'd only get to have 1 gallon and the rest would get dumped. So now I'm going to talk about doing research on wells. If you look at some country property and you think there's a well on the property, there are ways you can find out information about that well and whether it's something you might be able to use. There are well logs that can be located either at a local county office, or this particular one here is the Core Research Center online. They have a well catalog searching mechanism. Now keep in mind, this may end up being an oil well rather than a water well, whereas if you go to the county in the environmental health department, they will have records of the wells that are for domestic use for water. So here's the U.S. Geological Survey, Central Region Core Research Center Administration. And this is an example of their website and how you would do some searching. You could look on there and either look on a web-based search or a text-based, and you put in the state and the county and so forth and the specific information, and it can tell you what, if anything, is on that property on record. And then if you go to a specific county, I just arbitrarily selected Washington State. Here is the website where you can search for wells that have been professionally installed over the years, and they have records. You could do the search from a map and zoom into the area that you're looking at, or you could do it in a text form. And then I arbitrarily picked a well log that happens to be a friend of mine that lives in that area, and he put in a well a few years ago. So this particular well log is what information you would find. The well driller fills this form out and turns it in when they are done. So you can see from this that the well log was done as 2013. And as we go down through this, you can see up above here that this is a domestic water well. It's not an oil well. It's not one for doing cattle. It's not a city well. It's domestic well on a country property. And here you can see that at the time in 2013, it was a new well. And then here you can see some pretty important information. The well is a 6-inch diameter, and the depth of the completed well was 280 feet deep. And then you can see that the static level is 42 feet. So remember, the well is how far down did they drill, but the static level is where the water table is when there is no pump running for the last few hours. So this is really pretty good because the water table, even though the well is 280 feet deep, the well table is 42 feet. So once the pump runs, it might go down some and then it'll recharge and come back up. But the static level is 42 feet. So that means that well is a good well. Even though they had to drill deep, the static level is 42 feet. So you can see that when you're looking at wells, information about wells, there are wells that are artesian, which means it doesn't need a pump. The water is pushed up by nature through the well from underground without the need of a pump, because the area that's feeding the water table is above the level where you are. So that's an artesian well. Another is a drilled well. That's your typical country property. You would not have a city municipal well if you lived in a country property. There is the possibility, though, that you might find country property that has a community well. And so that would mean that maybe there's a dozen homes that when they develop the lots, the parcels of land, that they made a big well to serve all of them. In that kind of a situation, you would be married into this community well, and it's all volunteer, so you'd probably be involved in trying to keep it up to date and everything. And you'd have to probably pay dues for that service. My own personal preference, when I was looking for land, we looked at some that was like that and we avoided it because if we're going to be completely self-sustaining, we don't want to be married into some agreement with neighbors and everything about water supply. So in my opinion, a drilled water well is really ideal for country property, unless you're lucky enough to find a spring, which we will address in more detail in a later presentation. To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.